When it comes to documentary filmmaking, the shoot is the fun part. It's really a honeymoon period. All the traveling, meeting new people, visiting new places, shooting beautiful B-roll, life is good. But as hundreds and hundreds of gigs of footage start to pile up, a little voice inside your head starts singing, "Boy, you're gonna edit that shit a long time. Boy, you're gonna edit that shit a long time." Documentary, more than any other type of film, is really made in the edit. And because the possibilities are nearly endless and there's no clear goal, the edit can become a terrible slog. It's like assembling a 1,000-piece puzzle, except you don't have a picture of how it's supposed to look in the end. Getting lost in the footage, spending hours looking for that one magical piece of B-roll that will tie the whole thing together.
That rug really tied the room together, did it not?
Re-listening to the same interviews over and over again, hoping to find new meanings and new connections. Hours quickly turn into days, days turned into weeks, and pretty soon you find yourself in editing hell. Well, I've been through that and survived to tell the tale. My first major documentary project recently premiered to a live audience of almost 1,000 people at a fancy Pants Gala reception. And not to brag, but they all seemed pretty excited by it. And right now I'm in the middle of the edit of another documentary project. And I already upgraded my workflow using the lessons I learned. So I'm making this video for all the smart people who would rather learn from my mistakes than make their own. The tips I'm about to share with you are not going to make your post-production into a cakewalk, but at least you will be able to avoid a complete cluster. Now, I'm gonna be using Davinci because that's my NLE of choice, but the stuff I'm about to tell you pertains more to the workflow side of things, so you can implement these tips in whatever NLE you prefer. And now, let's jump in the edit and I'll show you what I mean. Alright, so the key to surviving the edit is this concept of pre-postproduction. When I first started editing, I thought I'll just drop something on a timeline and see where it goes. Ooh, this piece of footage is nice, I'm gonna start with that. That's not the way to do it. At first it may seem like a big time sink. You want to jump in the edit and instead you have to do all this tedious work. But think of it as an investment. You put some hours into it now and save dozens of hours later. Okay, first step is to get organized. This is basic stuff really. Start by creating a bin structure. The specific structure you use is not that important as long as you understand it and you find it intuitive. Of course, you should separate your media by type, such as music, sound effects, graphics, stuff like logos, VFX, I have some film stuff here, transitions, and of course your footage, your main bin, should have even more organization. Here I have it separated into regions that I shot in, people I interviewed, so that when I need a shot from a specific place or specific person, I know where to look. But organizing into bins is just first step. The bigger your project, the more it pays to do the prep work. This here is just a 10-minute documentary, and even that I edited for weeks if not months. But if I were to edit a feature-length documentary, I would definitely use metadata. Now, what is metadata? It's basically a bunch of text fields connected with your files. Let's select this clip for example. You can see the metadata panel here on the right. Right now nothing is editable and you can see some basic text specs of the footage. If you press here, you can select all groups or a specific group you need, and this reveals a bunch of editable fields. So if I had a really big project, I would go through each clip and put keywords and people into metadata. So we have a bunch of clips from a award ceremony, right? I can select them and I can see that they're all shot under blue light. So here I can select keywords and just type blue light, put comma, and this is my new keyword. I can also see that this was shot in St. Petersburg, so I can also put that keyword. When you move to another clip, it prompts you to apply these changes, just click apply. The next type of metadata is really important, it's people metadata. Let's select this clip for example, right click it and press Analyze clip for people. Davinci looks for people in the clip and you can enter the name like person. I don't know who this is. And it appears here in the people metadata. Now, why is this useful? Well, let's jump back into the edit page. And there are smart beans both for keywords that we entered and for people. So when you press keywords, a drop down appears. And here are all keywords that I mapped through my footage. You can think of them as tags. So later, when you're looking for very specific types of shots, you can easily find them. Same works for people metadata. Alright, now that you have your bin structure and your metadata set up, let's jump into mapping our interviews and our B-roll. The one thing about interviews, they tend to be long, so you will want to avoid re-listening to them for no reason. Each run through an interview must serve some kind of purpose, and I prefer to do 2 run-throughs. So the first run through the interview, I do a string out and markdown. What is a string out? Basically, a string out is a clean cut of the interview, so I remove all the questions by the interviewer, I remove all the dead air, I remove clear mistakes and misspelling. For example, if she rephrases her answer and the second time it's better, I leave only the best version. And I do that while listening to the interview for the first time. Remember, you shouldn't just listen. Every time you listen through an interview, you should do something with it. So the first step is making a string out, and the second step is marking down. You can see a bunch of blue markers here, right? So every marker corresponds with something she's saying. Basically, every time she starts a new thought, I will put down a marker. Now, it's very important to put a marker not on the timeline, but on the clip itself. Because when I'll be copy-pasting this footage to another timeline, timeline markers won't travel with it, but clip markers will. Select the clip while holding Alt, and it just selects the video clip. Shift M, blah, blah, blah. And let's make it purple marker in honor of Gerald and Dunn. Okay, what that gives us is the map of this whole interview. And if we go here to the index and let's make it bigger, and we switch to markers, and here you can see our blah 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 marker. And this becomes basically a script of the whole interview. Now, I know that in Davinci 18.5 there's this speech recognition tech that basically allows text-based editing. Same thing is in Premiere, and there are other apps for that, but I actually prefer to do it by hand. There are a couple of reasons for it. First of all, these features may not support your language. Second of all, they make mistakes sometimes. And third, and the most important thing, is that they don't account for how people are saying stuff. And sometimes that's much more important than what they're saying. There's a bunch of intangible things like body language and intention and intonation, so it's not a carte blanche to not listen to your interviews. Of course, those speech recognition features will get better, but it's really not a substitution for mapping your interviews. Okay, so the first run through was string out and markdown. The second run through is when I make topical timelines. Now, what are those? Well, let's see. Here in media pool, I call them topic string out. These are basically recurring themes. So the themes that pop up over and over again. So for example, in this film, they talk a lot about work-life balance. And so I create a new timeline. Let's open it here. And when I do a second run through this interview, every time she talks about something related to work-life balance, I select it, copy and paste it to this timeline. And this way I get a timeline that collects all instances of some topic or theme popping up in any interview. And this you can do without even re-listening to the whole string out, because you can just go to index, and if you've done your mapping correctly, you'll be able to just go to a marker and select some clip and put it in your topical timeline. Sometimes a piece of interview is related to 2 or more different topics, and that's okay, just put them in both or multiple timelines. When you are done creating topical timelines, you'll get several benefits. First of all, you will see which timelines are big and which are tiny, and that should give you a clue about which themes are dominant, which themes are main themes of your film. So after I've done this second run through and created topical timelines and identified the main themes of the film, I'll start making a rough cut by cutting down these topical timelines onto a main timeline. Another thing I'm doing is I'm looking for connections between interviews. You really want to make it feel like different people are developing a single train of thought. To do that, you should listen to where they're talking about the same thing and try to avoid them repeating each other. This is where you start really cutting, chopping phrases, chopping words out, but since this is a new timeline, we're not destroying anything. And this is how I start building a rough cut, just with interviews. Because in a documentary, interview is the story, is the backbone of the story. And that means only working with interviews. So in the rough cut, you'll start building timelines like this. Okay, here's where they talk about the team. Here's where they talk about company culture. And each thematic block like that is a complete thought or a complete miniature story. It has a beginning or a setup, an explanation, the middle, and some sort of conclusion, and hopefully like a really emotional line in the end. So beginning, middle, and end in each of the blocks of your story. And in both projects that I'm showing you today, I have about 5 thematic blocks, each lasting about a couple of minutes. And they have clear demarcation between them, clear section transitions. Let's look at this interview. First of all, you will notice that this is a multicam clip.
Lilu Dallas Multipass.
So multicam is basically a nested timeline that has your 2 cameras synced up, and you have 2 or more tracks for each camera and each sound source. Right here you can see that this is a multicam clip, and these are original clips. The beauty of shooting an interview with multiple cameras is that you don't have to be afraid of jump cuts. For example, I can just select this clip, right click, switch multicam clip angle, and a jump cut becomes a normal cut. Same thing goes for audio. Let's say that this audio was clipped, and I can just select it with Alt, switch multicam clip angle, angle 2, and this is audio from another source. Another thing that makes multicam really handy is that it keeps your timeline clean. You only have one video and one audio track occupied for an interview, even though there are multiple cameras and multiple audio sources. Multicam timelines really save you a lot of time in the coloring phase, and that's why I love them. If we go into color page, and here you can see that I've thrown basic ACES transform and some exposure and white balance adjustments, and just copied it on other clips. And the beautiful thing is when you've chopped your interview into 1,000 little pieces, when it comes time to color grade it, you can still go back to the multicam timeline and just grade your whole interview. And of course, since all your edits are copied from nested timelines, everything will update automatically, and you won't have to look through your timeline selecting every time this interview pops up and do some shared nodes or grouping or anything like that. Okay, so now let's talk about cutting B-roll. On the first watch through, I'll take everything that is usable. Not good, just usable. And I'll put it all down on the timeline for a specific topic, same as we did for interviews. And after that, I'll know that anything that is not in this timeline is unusable. I'll never have to go back and look at the raw footage. And it's super important that you never delete anything from here. You take clips from here, put it in your rough cut and trim them there. Of course, you're going to want to select best stuff from your B-roll. And I use this simple method. If I see a good B-roll clip and I know it's probably going to make it into the final edit, I just elevate it. And by that I mean just pushing it one track up. And that's also handy because my B-roll is usually on track 2 in the rough cut timeline. And so if I copy and paste it from there, it will land on the right track. That's just my way to do it. You can use colors or flags or whatever to mark clips you like, but it's very important to leave everything usable there, because in the final stages of the edit you won't be looking for beautiful clips, you'll be looking for right clips, clips that provide meaning, that illustrate, that show story instead of telling it. And sometimes these are not the best clips. Sometimes they'll be shaky, sometimes not well exposed, sometimes the framing is off, but you need them for the story. And that's why you never delete anything. Okay, so now we're only working on our main storyline. And this is where you might get a temptation to start working on some other things. For example, I love color grading. It's my second most favorite part of the job. And when I see some beautiful B-roll shot, my hand just wants to go to the color page and just start, messing with sliders and tweaking stuff. No, don't do that. Because your workflow should be sequential. And that means you only do one thing at a time. First, you're only editing interviews. Second, you're only working with B-roll. Third, you do sound design and transitions. Stuff like color grading and visual effects you do in the very, very last stage, after you've locked down the edit. And look, I get it. The temptation is high. You put that one cool B-roll clip and you start thinking about sound design. 2 hours later, you added a bunch of transitions and sound effects and colored a couple of clips, but your actual edit didn't move anywhere. So it's very important to stay disciplined and only do one thing at a time, sequentially. Of course, you don't want to look at log footage while you're editing, so just throw some basic transform, but don't do final grading until the very last step. And this is a good place to talk about non-destructive workflow. You really should never delete anything of your work. Every time you finish some kind of rough draft of your timeline, make a copy of it. For example, this rough draft is 30 minutes long, right? And this film is supposed to be 10 to 15 minutes. So I'll probably have to cut this down to a third of the size. But I won't do it here in this timeline. I'll go here in main timelines and I'll duplicate this timeline and call it, you guessed it, Rough Cut V2. And here is where I'll start deleting things and moving things and so on. And every iteration like that, you should make a duplicate. Never trim, never cut your previous timeline. And that's just super important in the end, where you receive client notes. Never make changes that they suggested in the final timeline. Make a copy, because more often than not, they will ask you to go back to the previous version because it was better. Goddamn right it was. So in essence, never burn any bridges in the edit. Make it so that you can always backtrack. And that philosophy of non-destructive workflow really applies to everything. So nesting timelines like we did with multicam, and using tracks also. Every track in your timeline really should have a specific purpose, and you shouldn't mix and match them. For example, track 1, only interviews. Track 2, only B-roll. Track 3, only titles. Track 4, only transitions and effects. That way, first of all, you can always hide stuff that you don't need right now to work on it, and it's also handy in the color page. So for example, if I only want to color the B-roll right now, I'll just hide interviews and hide overlays and titles, and I'll be left with just B-roll. You should also make sure that audio stuff also goes to their dedicated tracks. So here I have 3 tracks for dialogue, and notice that every person has their own track. Why is that important? Well, because if we go to Fairlight, which is where you do audio stuff in Davinci, I can do equalization just for one person, because all their clips are on one track. Music is on its separate track, and of course sound effects are on their separate tracks as well. And that stuff also allows you to make use of buses. Now, what is a bus? Bus is basically like a router for your audio tracks. For example, I have 3 dialogue tracks and they all feed into the dialogue bus. You can see here in bus outputs it says dialogue. And my dialogue bus feeds into main. Main bus is basically the final mix of your video. It's important to do that stuff because, again, non-destructive workflow. If I want to make all the sound effects louder, instead of manually selecting all the clips or all the tracks that I have sound effects on, I can just go to my sound effects bus and just push this fader up. This is non-destructive. I didn't make any changes to individual clips. Everything remains untouched. Think of buses for audio the same way that nested timelines or multicam timelines work. And here I use voice isolation on every dialogue track, but the amount is different on each one, so I can fine-tune it for each person's circumstances. And by the way, this feature is putting audio people out of business. One click fix my audio button. It's crazy how well it works. Okay, so to summarize, organization, bins, structure, keywords, metadata, markers, Whatever helps you get there. Creating a map of your project so you never get lost and you always know where to find the stuff you need. Sequential workflow, only work on one thing at a time. First interviews, then B-roll, then sound design, then transitions and VFX. Color grading goes last. Non-destructive workflow, never delete anything, duplicate your timelines, compound clips, nested timelines, multicam, tracks and buses. These are the lessons I learned the hard way. You know, I really have a love-hate relationship with editing. I hate the hours in front of the computer, that feeling of being lost, and at times it seems the film that you're making just won't come together. But when it clicks and you put that final edit that makes the whole thing flow like magic, it's just the best feeling in the world. Well, maybe not the best, but pretty good.
Pretty good. Yes, it is.
You know that they say that a film is made 3 times. First in the script, second in the shoot, and third in the edit. And that's why editing is one of the last things I would outsource. You know, I'm a camera guy at heart. I love shooting, I love holding a camera, but I would sooner outsource shooting than editing, because it would be like giving up the authorship of the film. That said though, the least hours I'm spending at the computer editing, the happier I am. On the end card of this video you'll find another video about directing a corporate documentary, and if it's not there, I haven't made it yet, sorry. Well, I hope you found this helpful. I sure did. As the wise men say, when one teaches, two learn.
That some kind of Eastern thing?
Far from it.